Hello, everyone, and welcome another Numberly webinar today. We're more than happy to welcome today Neil Hoyne. Hello, Neil.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you, Neil. You're a long-term Googler. You've been at the Googleplex for many years now, more than 12 years, I think, and you're now chief strategist at Google. So throughout your whole career, you've been a little bit, we could say, maybe, and I hope you'll forgive me, the Indiana Jones of customer centricity, leaving no stones unturned when it comes to consumer analytics, busting business myths through precise database research.
I love that. Can I use that? Can I use that externally? The Indiana Jones of measurement of data of customer centricity. That's appropriate. I say pragmatically for all those people because they're great accolades. I like more modest expectations. I just try to work with a lot of companies to figure out how they apply their data. That's really what it is. That's what it comes down to.
You do more than just try to work with companies, Neil. In 2022, you've published an amazing book. Congrats. It's called
Thank you.
Converted, the data-driven way to win customer hearts. We love the title at Numberly. We love everything about your book, I must say, Neil, sincerely, because it is so much about using data, not as a goal per se, but as a way to achieve customer centricity with, in fact, a great relationship marketing, which is maybe, hopefully, the only thing we kind of know how to do, or at least how to try to do at Numberly. So it's a great practical field guide full of business insights, actionable recommendations. It's clear, it's pragmatic. It's yellow. You can see here, you need it. We can see some of the books behind you, Neil. So you need it. Everyone in the audience obviously needs that book. And
I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, truly. And as we share your passion also for research here at Numberly, we're excited to welcome you today to deep dive into all these topics. And so thank you so much for being with us and spending this hour with us.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
So today, Neil, I will be joined by Camille Berth. Hello, Camille, our loyalty and retention expert, and by Annabelle Kranich, insights and data analyst here at Numberly. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Thibaut. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Hi, everyone.
So without further ado, let's jump right into our content for today. We'll talk about how to build a culture of learning in an organization, a culture of data. We'll explore, obviously, one of your favorite topics, customer lifetime value and its business implications. But first, let's start, Neil, if you accept, with your vision on marketing conversations with consumers. As you say in your book, the fact is digital marketers, you say myself included, are better at making statements than conversation. Well, we'll see that, Neil. We'll try to have a conversation, a nice one, during the hour now. And from there, we will kick off with Camille.
Yes, so we wanted to introduce this part by speaking about quite an interesting story from Jean Patou, who worked at Louis Vuitton and in the 1920s. And at that time, he already understood that keep having a database full of valuable data point was the best way to start a conversation with customers. So this is leading us to the first question that we have for you today on the next slide. And so we understood that your viewpoint on conversation is very pragmatic. It's about obviously not about capturing every single interaction, but learning to recognize the signals that are important. So did we get it right?
Absolutely. And it actually tied into the story you just mentioned. When they talked about it was capturing the valuable parts of a customer conversation. All too often, companies get stuck because they want to capture everything that's coming through. It becomes almost an obsession to say, we need to know every single thing the customer does without necessarily understanding how it's going to be applied or how it's going to drive value to the organization. And there's never an end to product, solution, tools, questions we might ask a customer. But it seems to break down when you say, all right, well, you're going to ask me this question from a customer lens. What are you going to do for it? And the reason why I bring that up is because oftentimes smaller businesses feel that they're at a disadvantage to larger ones, where they say the larger ones must know so much more about their customers, so imagine what they could do. And I often counter it with it to say they know a lot, but they don't know how to apply it. And that's oftentimes a hidden skill of a lot of marketers, is to go and to say, if you know how to take that data and connect the questions that you're asking, what you're learning about your customers, and apply it, it leads to a richer experience than just if you ask a whole bunch of questions and nothing comes out of it. And think about how, just in our personal lives, how unfulfilling that conversation would be. You're sitting across the table from somebody else. They keep asking you about your personal life, about your work, your ambitions. You answer all these questions, and then you say, okay, now what? And they're just, oh, I just wanted to know. Well, that's not very fulfilling. You want something back. Were you going to help me in some way, make my experience, make the conversation flow? And instead, nothing happens. And so naturally, consumers go and say, so you're just taking my data to take it, to sell it. And that connection isn't built because they see no value being returned to them. And so that's, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just, can we get a little bit closer?
So Neil, talking about value that you can get out of this data, we all love personalization. It's almost something that should be a service that consumers expect, like we see here in this survey from Harris. 63% of consumers say they expected personalization as a standard of service. If you have maybe your kids do like bikes in the Silicon Valley, Neil, I had, when I was living there, this great example I liked so much from Mike's Bikes, whereby after 2 years, after buying the bikes for your kids, 2 years later, you would get this very nice email from the shop telling you that probably your kids had grown a bit 2 years after, and maybe the bikes would be a bit too small, so they would offer you a trade-in credit, 50% on those kids' bikes, if obviously you were to come and bring those old bikes and buy some new ones. So this is, I think, a great example of a very personalized, customized message, email in that case, which really brings a service to the recipient. So we wanted to know a bit what was your view and in which cases you believed in personalization.
In all cases possible, but I'll put some guardrails around it. Number one is, we recognize that a lot of companies are missing the very basic cases of personalization because they don't go far enough. There's a great study a couple years ago out of Stanford that found simply adding a first name to an email subject line was enough to increase open rates of that email, engagement with that email, eventual conversions, while at the same time decreasing unsubscribes. Now go open up your inbox and look at the emails you receive from companies and how many that had your name, customize that subject line into what is pretty well established, and I don't say as close to irrefutable evidence as we have, that says it works. But companies say, well, no, it's not just about simple personalization. I need to have the absolute right message at the right time to all consumers. And again, that means we need to collect more data and make things more complicated. And so I say, you want to personalize those interactions at all times, and likely the entry of what your customers are expecting is a lot lower than the pressure you're putting on yourself. Now, it does come with one criteria when it comes to personalization. The customer needs to be okay with it. If you know somebody's first name, but they didn't provide that to you, then that sends out creepy vibes. How did you know that? Or when someone thinks you're in market for a product. Target, the retailer here in the US, had that debacle many years ago where they were assuming somebody was expecting a child, but that person didn't recognize it in themselves. And that ties to that larger conversational element. They say, if you walked up to somebody and you knew their name, but they never met you before, or if you walked up to someone and said, congratulations, you're pregnant, they're like, I didn't tell anybody. And then I kind of use those real world examples to say that's where I put those lines. But otherwise, you see, all it takes is just a little bit of care, concern, and a little bit of data and the right principles to be able to engage and personalize your content for your customers. And so I don't think enough companies go far enough with it. I don't think they do anything with their data. I think consumers expect some level, and they just need to go out there and actually try to do it.
This is great. Thank you so much, Neil. But if you put first names in the subject lines all the time, at some point there might be something systematic.
Yep.
And we've looked a few years ago in this newsletter we would design and send for a great e-commerce store on the French market. We would build recommender algorithms and integrate it within the email. And we noticed and published some research on the need for balancing, in fact, among those recommendations, popular, similar, and serendipitous recommendations, meaning that in some cases and among the 6 recommendations we were proposing in the newsletters, you want to have some similar products, maybe the next Harry Potter. If you just bought the number 3, maybe you might be interested in number 4. I don't know. Or this is popularity actually, but you also want to have some diverse products, meaning you want to explore. And in machine learning, people often talk about this compromise between exploration and exploitation. So we wanted to ask you about this, about how important for you unexpectedness and surprise were in marketing in order to drive true customer conversations. Because sometimes AI or machine learning could seem a little bit too systematic, and we believe that's a risk. If you always see, the newsletter from the same brand coming up with always your first name in the subject, at some point you're going to experience some fatigue, don't you think?
Oh, you're very polite with that. I would say absolutely there's fatigue on it, to which people say, look, you're doing the same thing over and over again with no variation. And that power to surprise and delight customers is one you want to leverage. Let me unpack this a little bit, going back to where you started with the recommendation engines. You're absolutely right. In fact, a lot of people say, if you're buying a toy, the recommendation we should make to you is batteries, which makes sense. And the customer feels connected. You're giving me a product I need. On the other hand, from the company side, what tends to have the most incrementality are things that the customer wouldn't necessarily find on their own, which is oftentimes saying we're not going for the product they're 99% likely to buy, that perfect match. We're going to kind of wager there may be a 30-40% chance you have no interest in this product, but for the other people that connect with it, it's the right fit. And so that's the thing. Are you too safe and conservative, saying only the right thing all the time? Or are you going to push those limits a little bit further? And that's where it becomes important for machine learning, is that oftentimes when we look at machine learning and also some of these larger AI models, we have to remind ourselves that these models, when built off of our own data, is limited to what we've done in the past. If we've always targeted one type of customer, we may be really good at that customer, at that type of approach, at that type of campaign. But there could be better customers out there. And so how do you continue to explore? How do you try new things? And that's where I think that unexpected mandate is incredibly helpful. If it becomes part of your company's process, or even your culture, in the best cases, to try new things, to say, we need the data, we need to explore, then that leads to that unexpectedness of customers to say, I didn't think this company would engage me in this way, but I like it. I didn't expect them to think about me or offer these types of products or deliver this promotion. Even right now, going into the holiday season, you see the same routine promotions. I know for some companies, a coupon code is coming in the next 2 weeks. I know even if I need to buy from that company, if I hold on a little bit longer, that coupon code is going to come. That's not going to be incremental to their efforts. In fact, it's likely the opposite way, because they're going to lose money. But what if I don't know what that company is going to deliver? What if I'm waiting in nervous anticipation for that surprise? And those are very human elements that machine learning can capture, because by the time it captures it, by and large, it's been done so many times that it's now part of that habit. And so that exploration of always meeting new customers, trying new ideas, executing on different types of campaigns outside those models is necessary for what we're trying to do in building those customer relationships.
That's all very fine, Neil, but we hear all the time, and marketers hear all the time, that they need to build seamless, experiences. And what you just said is, no, we need unexpectedness. So how can you be seamless and unexpected at the same time?
Look, you're going to have processes. I'll use hotels as an example, right? You go into hotels, you don't want surprises, right? When you're ordering a gift for somebody else, you want consistency in what you want to expect. But that doesn't mean there's not places to push outside those boundaries and try different things. And so what I always look at it is a business is going to have its core processes that it needs to get right. If I order a product, do not surprise me with a different product I didn't order. But there's other things to say. How are you engaging those customers and providing that support? One example is just this retailer out here in the US, Chewy, does a phenomenal job. When they first acquire a customer, they send out a card to all these customers welcoming them to the family. And you hold up these cards and look carefully and say, did a computer write this in like a handwritten font? And you can't tell. So I actually asked them, I said, do you actually do this? And they said, you know what? It's part of our culture where everybody has to spend time writing a handwritten card to a customer. And I was like, well, that seems like that's not effective. You can certainly do this. And they're like, no, our customers will know. And for our culture, we like to surprise them to say, when was the last time you received a card from an e-commerce company welcoming you to that family? Or returns are another example. Say you order the wrong product. They certainly have that standard return process. Here's how you get it back to us. Here's how you return that product. That's what you expect as a customer. I bought the wrong product. I have a simple way to return it. But occasionally they'll also look at, well, what were the circumstances by which you needed to return that product? So in one case, a pet that we had an outdoor cat that was adopted actually by a family in another state. And then Chewy had their autocomplete. They automatically sent more cat food out. And my wife reached out and just said, hey, we don't need this. Can we return? And they said, well, why don't you need it? And we said, oh, well, because the cat now has a different owner. And they said, you know what? Don't even bring the product back. Don't worry about shipping it back. Let's do this. Let's donate it to an animal shelter in your neighborhood. They can have free food. They're happy. And we hope next time you get a pet, you come back to us. And so they had that standardized process in place where the expectations were set with the consumer. But then you hear something unexpected, and all of a sudden it goes from being a transaction, Chewy was the place that I bought food to now is I probably wouldn't buy from a different retailer, even if Chewy took longer to ship and were more expensive because of that unexpected interaction.
Awesome. Talking about your book, Neil, back to your book. It was written pre-chat GPT craziness. Would you say that Gen AI is, so obviously it couldn't have been written by ChatGPT, by the way, but would you say that Gen AI is a major step in orchestrating human-like you said, conversations at scale with users, or are you still a little bit cautious with that?
I think it demonstrates the potential of AI in a way that the mass market hasn't been able to understand before. And we've all seen the outputs from these tools appearing very human-like. And so it's easy to draw that connection. Where I am cautious is that when you look at the outputs, in technical terms, we call it hallucinations, that there are things that it gets wrong. It will make up things that will sound plausible unless you're knowledgeable, but to a reader, it stands out to say, something's off. Why would you say that? Why would you propose this? And so what I often argue sometimes is these models are great for being conversation starters, for providing sometimes SEO content. I worry about them in the scope of customer interactions, just because even with things like chatbots that we're forced to, I think a lot of companies look at these tools from an efficiency side. What if we didn't have to write that customer support email? What if we didn't have to answer that phone call? And I worry that customers may get frustrated because they're looking at how many minutes they save writing new content and building a chatbot with customers, and not necessarily what happens when customers fall out of favor to say, this is not helpful to me. Kind of an example I'll give here, just this is the application technology, because most companies are looking at this to say online customer support. How do we engage our customers? When was the last time anybody was actually pleased with having a phone menu when they call up a company? You know exactly what you want. You call up American Airlines and they're going to have you run through 6 or 7 phone menus, and you just start yelling at it, agent, give me somebody to talk to because it's going to save me more time than going through your audio chat bot. You know, we even have companies, Discover credit cards here. They run marketing campaigns saying, our advantage is if you call us, you talk to a person. And I bet in a couple of years we'll get this. When you get an email from us, it's written by a person. When you go to our website and chat with us, you're talking to a real person, because I worry that that counterbalance will be great. ChatGPT is great for a business side or for university students for writing papers. But when we're on the receiving end of it and we're trying to get help or we're trying to build that relationship with a company and we're getting automated, non-human responses, I worry that at that point we hit a boundary condition that companies need to be aware of and measure and optimize for, as to not lose any customers on the other side.
Absolutely. Thank you, Neil, so much. We need to move to part 2 already about relationships, no longer just conversations, but really what makes a true relationship. And so, as you say in your book, the masters of retention are just using their data better. They're distinguishing the customers worth saving from those who aren't, based on their lifetime value. So, Annabelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thibaut. Yes, to kick off this part, we're discussing customer lifetime value. There are obviously various approaches, one of them being this formula with several input variables, including acquisition costs, for instance, over a specific time period, and the output being the famous CLV, which is the present value of the future cash flows that we associate with a customer. And in addition to these data inputs, modeling the probability of repeat buying, or the famous R word, as we discussed with Peter a few months ago, remains a challenge. Once it's computed, however, it's all about leveraging its value. And I think, Thibaut, you wanted to elaborate more on that and give some specifics.
Yeah, and back to Pete, actually, we would like this section now to be a tribute to customer heterogeneity, because in the end, and for you in your books, it seems that what most of a brand's effort should go towards is acquisition. It's easier, you say, to find great relationships than trying to change people. Which I think is a very interesting statement. CLV helps businesses to understand if they're creating sustainable value for their business or merely positioning themselves between transactions. So tell us maybe a bit more about this, Neil.
So this is the easiest way I like to explain this, is that a majority of companies I work with focus on the development of customers. They have their CRM database. They want to extract more value. Acquisition kind of looks like a mass market activity. Bring them all in, they'll fall in love with us and how great they are. And so a lot of our conversations are around taking a step back to saying acquiring great customers is a lot easier than trying to develop and change them later on, at least from a cost side. And so I equate this very much to, and we can all relate to this because it's happened to us if we haven't been the person ourselves, where somebody comes to you and says, I've met the perfect person for me. If only I can change them first. And we immediately start thinking, you're like, why would you do that? Do you know, sure, you possibly can, but the time, the possible heartbreak, why don't you just go find the right person first? Right? Those stories are red flags. And it's the same thing with customers, is to acquire cheap customers who only want to buy your products on discount or when they're on promotion, and to hope that they turn into loyal customers willing to pay full price later on. Maybe, but it's easier just to find the right people early on. And so that's what we're really looking at here, is at the core of customer lifetime value on that relationship side is being able to look at any of your customers and saying, is this going to be a one-time transactional relationship like an Uber driver that I will never see again, but they may be a 5-star ride, versus someone that over the course of our relationship will continue to spend more money, stick around longer, and transact more often. And to be able to predict that early on in the relationship. And so that's kind of the marketing, the emotional side of it. The other side of it is we have to take a nod to the finance people, right? Finance people look at us, and one of the difficulties with CLV is they say, I like short-term accountability. I like being able to ask a customer for their money and know whether they gave me that money. But CLV starts to bridge this by saying really what we're doing at its core, when we look behind that formula we had on that previous slide, is that we're predicting cash flows. For a given asset, a customer you acquired, what are the cash flows we expect from that customer over time, discounted back to the present day? And when companies embrace that philosophy, it's no longer that marketing is an expense, it's marketing is an investment. You're investing in an asset, just like you would real estate. You wouldn't buy real estate and say, how much money am I going to make off this real estate the next quarter? And that's the totality of the investment. You say, no, tell me the cash flows. We're going to buy this real estate for X. And we expect to see why in the next period, the next period, the next period, and we're going to discount that back to the present day. That's what you're doing with your customers. You're saying, we're going to acquire this customer for X, and this is how often and how much we expect this customer to be worth each period that follows. And that's why it's so compelling, is now we can look at, there you go. The next slide, put it up. Now we can start to look at those connections between that value and that action just by having a way to score and measure these customers.
Yeah, thank you. Neil, I was going to say thank you, Pete. Thank you, Neil, so much. And one of the examples talking about marketing as an investment that we like very much at Numbly is a case we did with a great consumer credit company in Europe, so Franco. We helped them compute with a sophisticated customer data platform, estimated and predicted CLVs and scoring based on the behavior and loan simulation on the website. Based on this, we would send real time to the call center the scoring of who they should call first. And this is a basic application, but this drove a huge improvement in, first of all, in the completion rate, in the conversion rate of those calls made by the call center. And very important as well, the client satisfaction grew because obviously the more interested people, involved people were called first. And also the employee satisfaction increased a lot because they would have obviously higher conversion rates when calling. So this is, I think, one of the good examples of a very virtuous impact of leveraging CLV across your existing business, existing core processes within the company. Not talking about new complex ways of acquisition, but just looking at what works, how the call center works, and how a CLV approach could add up on this to improve the overall efficiency. So Annabelle, I think you had a question for Neil about that.
Yes, because we've seen the data input it kind of requires to compute CLV, and yet we have big differences in data availability across organizations. So it can often be linked to the industry in itself, actually. And since computing CLV can be a long and hard journey, we wanted to hear about some encouraging success stories, and we've selected 9 major sectors that you can see on the screen. Yeah. And if you have to select a few that are most effective at implementing business cases that are influenced by or leveraging CLV, which ones would it be?
So I'll start with one that spans across these verticals, and that's subscription-based businesses. Mobile gaming, entertainment, online streaming, they don't function if it's a single transaction. We acquired this customer, they'll spend this much next month, and then we'll try again to see if they stick around for a second or third. They're very good at understanding that because that's fundamental to a subscription-based business. Once you go outside of that, you start to see the typical players like retail, hospitality, and travel, where they have that data that comes directly. Now, it's not to say it's as easy as those subscription-based businesses because they can get away with the next transaction, the next booking, but they tend to have that data readily available so they can start modeling CLV. Now, that's compared against someone, probably the hardest one is when you think about the traditional CPG category, consumer packaged goods. I'm sorry, nobody's logging into a website to say they bought a bag of chips. It's just not going to happen. And so they struggle with that individual customer level data to understand CLV most effectively. Now, it's oftentimes those industries will come and say, look, we don't have customer level data. CLV is outside of our capabilities. And I almost argue that it's different. So for retailers, because everybody has that data, and a lot of them are using lifetime value, it's easier for them, and therefore there's less of an advantage to those industries where people have thrown up their hands and said, we're not doing it. Now let's take a look. Let's go back. What's the basic principle? Before we even talk about the mechanics, the calculation, the data, we're saying we want you to focus on customer relationships to making your decisions for acquisition, development, and retention of those customers. Nothing there says that I want you to be absolutely perfect about it. I just want you to have a hypothesis to say, out of our category, who are the better customers and why? And how do we test that? And if we were able to understand it, how would we find more of those people? And so what I'd really say is if you're looking at one of those industries to say, if only we could do this if we had data, I'd say that data is likely easier for you to capture than not. And if you have all that data and you haven't done anything with it, I'd say likely your industry may be running faster away from you than you notice. We were joking about this in the pre-call, but I'll bring everybody in. The companies that are the most sophisticated at lifetime value aren't mentioning it in white papers, conference keynotes. This is their advantage. They're saying, I get to go into the market and pick out the customers that I want and leave everybody else to our competitors who are bidding on a transaction basis. And it's wonderful for them. And that's an advantage that they want to keep. And so they love it when they manage to figure out an industry that's hard or to get panel-based data or anything that allows them to move ahead, they're not going to share it. And so that's kind of a long-winded way of saying all these industries are applicable. Some industries have an easier time because of data availability, but in those cases, they need to be more sophisticated in their approaches. Those that don't have the data availability, then it becomes a leadership question. Can we build panels? Can we build programs where we have slightly better data than our competition while ignoring all the gaps and saying we'll never get the sophistication of these D2C retail marketers, entertainment companies? But that's never the case. The case is always to say, can you leverage this data to be better than others that are subject to the same constraints and same limitations as you are? You know, I work in an auction environment. I work where people have to bid and outbid everyone else. Well, guess what? The auction doesn't reward perfect information. The auction rewards better information. Do you have a better signal than the people you're bidding against? That's enough. And so that's what I look at, is to say, just start. As long as you're heading in that direction relative to the pace of your industry, you're great. And I would call it a success case for any industry based on that industry's progress as a whole.
Great, thank you, Neil. So outsmarting competitors with data and some sort of CLV, it's, I think, critical because very often some companies would argue that yes, CLV is a beautiful concept, but they wouldn't know how to really activate it. Yeah. And one of the examples we liked a lot at Numbly, which we built recently, was to score visitors on their behaviors. So based on all the number of interactions with the website and obviously the past also transactional behavior, we could base computer CLV scoring again. And with some DSPs on the market, to talk a little bit about digital advertising, we could bring, for instance, in Xander programmable bidder, different bids for different levels of CLVs, and even one formula based on taking the score, the individual score, into consideration. So basically, you end up having one CLV, one bid. So we think this is very important, very interesting. We even built a product which we call CLV Maximizer to do programmatic bidding actually based on CLVs and CLV scorings. So my question, since you belong to the leader in the category, was actually, what about search? Neil, can you tell us finally what you're doing in Mountain View?
You know, with search, it's very simple. Is just helping people make slightly better decisions about the customers they want to acquire. And so I have a general principle in my work. I don't want anyone to click on an ad that's not leading to something incremental in their business. If you have a customer that's willing to click on an organic link, I don't want to see a paid link. That's the way that I look at it. If you have a customer that's clicking on too many ads, I want you to be able to withdraw your spending for it. But relative to CLV, I'll tell you what the companies are doing today. It's a saying, everybody assigns a bid, how much they're willing to pay for a keyword for a customer to a product. And what we do is we take this CLV data and we simply layer it on top. And not to say you're bidding up to full lifetime value, that's far too dramatic, but just to say, let's find a way to put our hand on the scale so that we're going to bid a little bit higher for the customers that are going to be more valuable to you. And we're going to spend a little bit less on the customers that aren't. And those shifts, usually with most companies, will start at 5%, nothing dramatic. But the goal is, can we help to improve the overall customer base of the customers you're acquiring without being overly dramatic in terms of losing all of the great marketing competencies you've built over the past decades. And so that's really what's happening on search right now, is that you're looking at bids, and for companies are saying, I can spend a little bit more on this new customer, or I can spend a little bit less on this existing customer, or here's how we keep nudging up the bids to make it a little bit more competitive. And what they're really looking at is this balance to say, how do we optimize lifetime value against our customer acquisition cost? And how to keep them in line? How do we get the most valuable customers by spending the least amount of money? And so with search in particular, because it's this great exploration mechanism, and they have this intent that people are closer to buying, they just want to explore to say, can we do this? And this has really been the great exploration, is because search will draw the introduction, but then companies really get to have that creative side. When we talk about adding stuff into it, we talk about the bias a couple questions ago on data sets. They say, all right, great, we're bringing in great customers. What do we say to them? What do we say? All the messages, mass market, right? We've always done it. What's the average customer want to hear? What do your best customers want to hear? What do your worst customers care about? They care about promotions and discounts. What about the better ones? I give an example. If you look at the airline industry, typically what performs best are sales and promotions, especially now. Airfares are too expensive. Save money. Well, when you look at the composition of an airplane, it's not uncommon to see 10% of the passengers drive 70% of the revenue on that flight. And they don't care anything about low fares because they're often not paying. It's a business fare. Their company's paying. They care about the quality of the product. They care about on-time rates. They care about customer service. How do you start messaging to them in your advertising to say, this is why you want to choose us and pick us? And again, this is just all that customer heterogeneity, is knowing that these customers are different, that they have different preferences, and let's just get out there and explore what that means to them.
Annabelle?
Yes, I think what you mentioned, thank you so much for your input. We've wanted to discuss another topic, which is the advantage of, thank you. So you mentioned the advantage of subscription-based businesses, but for many firms, one of the key challenges is to decrease the volume of single buyers or the one and done customers. So the key objective is often to generate a second purchase, which has actually turned into a sort of obsession and is actually more focused on the short term rather than trying to strive to create a long-term relationship with the brand. So our question is, do you still believe in long-term loyalty?
I believe in long-term loyalty, although I'm a bit critical as to how loyalty itself is described. If a company is saying loyalty for us is that a customer buys every year, all right, well, send them a discount that makes your offer too good to refuse, and they will continue to buy. But is that loyalty? Or was it just that you gave away so much margin that economically, why not do it? Pete and I love to talk about airplanes. I don't have a thing for airlines. I just find they're relatable to everybody. If I fly on an airline 10 times and they say, congratulations, you're now a loyal customer, we'll give you a discount. Is that building loyalty, or is that simply giving me something back that I gave you? It's a bulk discount on seats. You bought 10 seats, we'll give you an 11th seat free. Or if you're the only carrier that goes the route that I'm taking, am I loyal at all? And what I say for that is I don't think companies have been thoughtful enough as to what they define as loyalty, and then simply compartmentalize it to say, we hope they buy again. But the reality is that all customers will have their own patterns as to how they buy, that companies with CLV are just starting to understand. Some consumers will buy from you every week. They'll be happy to buy from you at full price. They'll be happy to buy if you raise your prices, if you take longer to ship. They'll be willing to buy from you, even if you screw up. And in fact, they'll be willing to defend your brand against other people and the mistakes that you made. I consider that to be more loyal than somebody that comes around once every 12 months and buys a product, or that's someone you got to buy a second purchase. And so what I like to look at is to say, if that second purchase has been proven to lead to that relationship later on, then I'm all for it. But if you start optimizing sometimes to a metric, and this is a great quote, is that sometimes when you optimize to a particular KPI, you need to understand other KPIs that will be affected by it. And so sometimes you may push for that second sale, but You just gave away margin, and so they did it. And so if that second step is really that important gateway to say we're measuring and we think this relationship is developing, that's great. If just an arbitrary metric, and sometimes net promoter score, I hesitate to bring this up, but we will. Net promoter score, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend? I was at a restaurant in London one time. They came up to me and they're like, well, we know you're American and Americans love to tip. And they're like, don't do that here. And I was like, okay. He's like, here's what I need you to do. He's like, you're going to get a survey afterwards, or they're going to ask you how likely you are to recommend us to a friend. If you put 10 on that scale and you put my name, that's greater than any money you could give me, because then I'm going to get recognition and a bonus from my boss at the end of the month. That's easy enough. Click on 10, off they go. And then you have some manager in the back being like, our net promoter score is off the charts. Everybody loves us and we're building all these loyalists, to say, no, you didn't look enough at the systems that were driving it. And so you have this great graphic here on the right-hand side. You need to understand what that system looks like for your customers. You can't just escape by saying, because they're making a second purchase or because they open our emails, that those customers are loyal. You really want to set that bar higher and be honest with yourself to say, you may have a lot of customers that aren't loyal, but how do you start building those processes to develop that relationship in a way that makes sense for your business?
Thank you, Neil, so much. Part 3 already, because in your book you dedicate quite significant time on self-improvement. So how to help and guide people in the organization to get on the same journey of learning. This seems like a very important topic. So maybe Camille, you want to tell us about it?
Yes, so it seems like your motto is seek progress and not perfection. So we wanted you to just elaborate a little bit more on that so we can better understand what that means in an organization.
All right. How to make this, because it's over. People talk about it. Here's the way that I tend to explain it to people is that, here in California, I like to go hiking with my family. And if you go out a little bit further away from the Bay Area and you're on some of the trails, you will run into signs inevitably that point out the risks of walking along those trails. And here in California, one of those large risks is that you're going to run into a bear. All right. Bears aren't a great time. They're great animals. But if you run into a bear and a bear is upset with you, you're going to die. I mean, you can't outrun the bear. You can't fight the bear. It's not a close contest. And then you start thinking, you're like, do I really want to take this hike? And the reason why I always think about that is because it's similar to some of the existential problems that businesses face, what I like to call their bear problems. Changes in privacy, the need for growth. What do we do with AI? How do we integrate and use our data? Companies are very quick at recognizing that the bear is coming at them. But they do a very large company thing. After recognizing that the bear is coming at them, they seem to gather, if you picture like 80 people in this forest, to come out with the perfect solution. And you figure this out. Everyone has a role to play. Product is going to build a product roadmap for outrunning the bear. Engineering is going to come and be like, here's how we scale this up to millions of bears. Legal is going to come out to say we need a lengthy customer disclaimer. And all the while, the bear is getting closer and nobody's making any progress. So oftentimes people say, well, what do we do in those instances? How do we run away from the bear? And I'll tell them the best companies that I work with are ones that recognize that same problem. And they say, we have no idea, but let's just start running. Let's just get more distance between us and the bear. Let's make some incremental progress on this problem that we have. It may be inefficient. We may wish that we went left instead of right, but we know we need to start moving on this. And what they quickly realize is that the goal of any of this is not to outrun the bear at all. It's simply to outrun other campers, or in your case, your competition. And that's success. And in marketing analytics, oftentimes what we have is we have too many teams that try to solve the problem, to tell you the exact ROI, to understand the exact consumer behavior, the exact message. And when I talk about the seeking progress and not perfection, it's really coming into that attitude to say, no, you just want to start running. You want to be a better company tomorrow than you were today. You want to acquire not only perfect customers, but just slightly better customers tomorrow than who you acquired the day before. it should hopefully take a little pressure off you, but also motivate you to say, every company will sit around and try to plan their way to progress. And really, I'm trying to nudge them to say, look, just start running. Take this content that we're talking about and do something different with it. You may not be perfect with lifetime value, but start to explore it and apply it even in small pockets of your organization. That's better than creating 80, 100 slide PowerPoint deck saying, this is how we could have a perfect solution, all things considered.
Awesome, Neil. So I guess this is what you call marketing exploration. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit about the types of organization that do it well and what kind of role they should play?
Marketing should be at the top of the pyramid. And here's what I mean by that. In a lot of organizations, product builds something, they hand it over to marketing and they say, sell as many units as you can at the lowest possible price. We built a subscription business. Sell it, get as many subscribers as you can and keep that acquisition cost down. We have a retail product. Sell as many units of a shirt as you can and spend as little as you can. Or we're just going to get you and say you can only spend 8% of revenue because Wall Street expects that. I say no. Marketing is the closest touch point to customers, to that relationship, to that loyalty cycle we were just talking about. Instead of just having product and pushing things on them, start with them and say, for our high value customers, for our great customers, what can we sell them more of? What do they want from us? What are they willing to invest? What's important to them? And feeding that back to product so that product can deliver on their needs. To looking at those customers where we wish we could get more money out of them, to say, look, we're in your category, but you're only spending 5% share of wallet with us. What do we have to build to capture the 95%? And that creates a wonderful cycle because you're in tune with what your customers are asking for, and you're providing those insights back to the rest of the organization to say, here's how we create value. Contrast that just to the marketer who's stuck to say, here's the latest product that they came up with. Here, everybody buy it. We have extra inventory. Send out the email promotions. Please, somebody buy this product of ours. So marketing should lead. They should lead the exploration, the understanding of customers, the creation of real value, and should be the closest partner to the rest of the organization, guiding them on how they can capitalize on those opportunities.
Thank you, Neil, so much. There's also in your book very often the notion of experimentation, which we like a lot at Numbly because we think it's a good way to progress, like you say. But to be true, it's often complex. And we love this book by Stephen Tomke, Experimentation Works, The Surprising Power of Business Experiments. Yes, it's surprising, it's very powerful, but one of the topic you touch on in your book is how to scale a culture of experimentation within an organization, how to make it something that is well known, well documented, that is usual, where everyone learns, in fact, because if you want to progress with a large organization, you want everyone to be in charge of building that learning curve, and probably you can learn faster.
Yeah. So how to approach this one? All right, first, let's start with what it's not. It's not an executive coming into the organization and saying, we're all going to run more tests. I've actually seen that done where they're like, that's what we're going to do. That will build our culture. We'll just run more tests. I've seen companies where they've had quotas on the number of tests that they run, and they run horrible tests. It's just they have to hit that number. When you look at cultures, really another way of looking at it is how do you start to build and manage the process around testing new ideas? And I use that language purposely because otherwise we get caught up in the methodology, sample sizes and confidence intervals, and who are we going to target and not. I say, no, how do you get a new idea in your organization through that process of experimentation where you're collecting enough data to know whether you should roll out given the risks? Now, I'll give you one example, and this is actually what grounded a lot of the book that we're talking about, was that it was built on bad examples, things companies shouldn't do. Now, this one wasn't included in the book, but I'll share a little bit about it. One time I asked the CMO, I said, he was talking about his culture of experimentation. And I said, well, what does it look like if you want to run a test? And he said, well, it's very simple. I go to the marketing team and I say, we're going to run this test. And a day or two later, that test is live. Amazing. Amazing. I mean, especially as a CMO, the CMO comes in and says, we want to run this test. Marketing will respond. Later that evening, I could meet with a few other analysts. We're having a couple beers. And I said, what's your process of experimentation? How long does it take you They said, best case, 8 to 12 months. 8 to 12 months, a single test. Walk me through it. All right, here's where it starts. We come up with an idea, something we want to test, but we can't test it ourselves. We need to convince our boss, and they need to convince their boss. And then they'll take all of our ideas, and somehow they always get reduced to 3 to 5 tests, never 4, never 6, always 3 or 5 experiments. And then we're going to go forward. And I'm like, oh, and then you run the test. And they're like, no, no, no. Then we need to convince all of our stakeholder teams to run the test. We need to convince marketing to give us budget. We have to convince engineering to put it part of a sprint, legal to sign off on it. And then they said 12 months later, we have our results. And I said, well, it must feel great to get it done. And they said, well, unless the test failed, and then everybody looks at us saying, congratulations, you wasted the past year on something that didn't work, and you took a whole bunch of our marketing budget that could have been spent on something else. That's what a culture of experimentation looks like in some companies. And I said, so what do you do? I said, oh, it's simple. We only suggest tests to our CMO that we're 95% certain will work. I said, that's not an experiment. You know the outcome. And they're like, no, 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 this is great. Because then we go through the process, the test works, we look brilliant, and our CMO's on stage saying we have a culture of experimentation here because all of our tests happen to work. If you don't want that happening in your company, be honest with everyone around what that process is and allow them to talk to you about where they see struggles and roadblocks and spend your time clearing them. Don't obsess about a single test you're running. I want to know the uplift of mobile on YouTube. No, I want to know that process to say, if one of the analysts or people I hired that I paid great money for comes up with an idea, what is the process that they have to go through to test that idea and to act on that idea? And then look at those roadblocks and how you can clear it. Those teams, can I help you push this through engineering? Can I put a budget aside so you can run your tests? Can I clear the way so that if you get a great result, it's acted on? Or can I help you so that if the test doesn't work, that it's fine? And so I'll give you just one really quick thing in the interest of time. One of the characteristics, common characteristics of the best companies with experimentation is that they recognize people for great tests before the test is run. If you ever get into a culture where they're saying, congratulations to this person who found and ran this result and ran this test and had this great result, they shouldn't know what the result is. It shouldn't be their success or their failure. If somebody has a great hypothesis in your organization, a way to test it, and a path forward, those are the people you want to recognize. They found an opportunity in your culture that could help you grow, a lever that you could pull on to drive more sales or find higher lifetime value customers. It shouldn't be their responsibility to know whether that outcome will work. Then you no longer need a test. If you start to hire, promote, and recognize people with great ideas, then you separate those great people from your culture. You say, I'm hiring the people that will give me the ideas. It's my responsibility as a leader in my organization to make sure those ideas are acted on. But I'm separating their responsibility. Their responsibility in our culture is to find the ideas backed by data and tell me how we use them. My responsibility is to make sure they're recognized and to make sure they're implemented. If you have both sides working together, great, then you have that culture. You have more than going in and saying, we're going to run more tests or we're going to fail faster. And that's it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think talking about key factors to identify the strongest actors is also in line with our last question before we go into the Q&A.
Sure.
As you said earlier, it's not only about getting data, but also about what you do with it to get an advantage, in particular compared to the actors that are facing the exact same conditions. And recently, we've actually had very interesting discussions and reflectings around a tool that we're building that will help us in evaluating the data-driven maturity of a firm. So we'd like to use this special opportunity to get your view on the topic. So what does it mean specifically to be not perfect, but better, as you so nicely put it? What do you think defines data-driven maturity for an organization?
Here's how I tend to look at it. Let's keep this theme of experimentation, because there's lenses people can say on software, on hardware, and they all have different metrics. Here's what I look at. I will talk to people and say, how many ideas and opportunities were you able to create from your data? And how many of those opportunities were you able to act on? And that's it. And what I want to look at is I want to look at that number, but I also want to look at how that company progresses in improving that number. If you're not generating great ideas, then I point and I say, you don't have the systems, you don't have the talent, you don't have the data to find new insights about your customers. If those are piling up and you have plenty of ideas in your organization, but you're not taking action on them, then sending you more data and capturing more about your customers won't do anything. Then you have to look more at the processes to say, how is that data being acted on? I've worked with plenty of companies that have cutting-edge, state-of-the-art cloud implementations, capturing every data point imaginable, not seeing an ROI on their huge investments because the processes to use that data are broken. And so I usually start with that. I ask that question: how many ideas have you generated? How many ideas have you acted on? And let's see if we can improve that. And what's been your trajectory at improving it? And the companies that are more mature in their capabilities are ones that can accelerate that process because they know how to encourage their people to find new opportunities, and they know how to push them through the organization and act. To give you a sense of scale, when people talk about data maturity on the low end for me, just on that metric, is companies that can act on about 3 or 4 opportunities per quarter. That's what it is. We'll generate 3 or 4 new ideas. We'll act on 3 or 4 ideas. Best in class, 50 to 60 a week. If you're in one of those markets and you're doing 3 to 4, and that's, again, the average, that's what I see, and you're going up against someone that can use their data 50 to 60 times a week, then I'm frightened, because those companies in ladder camp are mature. That's how I look at it. That's how I look at it. And anything in between is all kind of supporting that metric, but I try to distill it down. You're capturing data, are you using that data? And that's where I leave it, at least from my scope.
Wonderful, Neil. This is such a pleasure to listen to you. We have one other question, maybe to launch the Q&A, and it was about humor. I don't know if you know this great book by someone at Stanford, very close to where you are, Humor Seriously. So we were wondering, do you believe in humor to build consumer relationships as well, and how to do it?
I hope not, because I'm not that funny, which means I'm not going to be that great at my job. No, I'm fine with it. I'm fine with anything, because I look at relationships that we have with companies as the same we have with relationships with people. I've never met anyone that says, I want to meet someone that's not funny. We all appreciate it. Just with anything, you just want to be careful as to how you apply it. You just want to be mindful of cultural barriers, how that scales, and how you do it. But yes, absolutely, you need it. You need something fun. We can't take ourselves too seriously in this life.
Perfect.
Maybe?
Yes, so I believe to conclude this Q&A and this session, we have an interesting question coming from the audience. And the question is, let me find it. So what role do you see sustainability and carbon emission reduction playing into current and future consumer relationship strategies?
Apart from the larger importance, as human beings, to get those programs managed, it's important to consumers, which means it has to be important to companies. That's what people across the table from you are saying is important to them. And to be able to connect with them, you have to share those same values. We see consumers being incredibly value-driven lately and looking at those things. And it's catching a lot of companies by surprise because they're not muscles they've had to use. And so I'd say they're of critical importance to the audience. What I would also say, though, is that it's not so much around greenwashing products and saying you're putting there. You really need to understand the intent and the behavior so that you can reflect it. And what I say to all companies is, you can't be someone you're not. You may say that you care about these things, but if you don't care about something that someone's talking to you about, it will show very quickly and you'll come out as disingenuous. And so it's not only understanding that problem, but it's also having the right values and the right connection with your customers to say, we either connect with you or we don't, and to not try to be someone that we're not.
Thank you so much, Neil. Another question, maybe to finish and wrap up already. Unfortunately, in the chat, someone said I would love Neil's thoughts on how highly seasonal gifting brands that make most of their sales during Q4 with low frequency can effectively leverage CLV.
I say it's still a perfect area to do it. Now, you'll need a little bit more data, because we do look at transaction frequency as one of those key criteria that we look at. But that's area number one, is to say it's still achievable. I work with furniture companies that see a purchase every 8 to 10 years doing CLV. It's still achievable, and there's enough data and enough techniques to help you out. So I wouldn't limit yourself at all. I would just realize that it's going to be a little bit harder than people who have repeat purchases throughout the year. The other thing that I'd mention as well is that there is a research paper. It's discussed in the book, but we're happy to send it along in case you have it, that talked about retailers who looked at their business being highly seasonal and some of the opportunities they had in promoting their products as gifts at different points of the year. And that goes to the data bias problem that we have, is that if all of our campaigns and all of our sales are in a certain period, it can become self-reinforcing, where we don't think about, are there ways to position our products at other times of the year? So the immediate answer is CLV works. It just requires a little bit more data. The second one, and this is a little bit more speculation because I don't know your business as well as you do, is to still say, I always look at those opportunities to expand our audience and meet new customers to close that gap of where we are versus where we might be able to get to.
Neil, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for giving so much encouragement to everyone with what is sometimes a challenging journey, to collect data, to come up with nice CLVs and to activate based on that. I think we all got so much from this discussion. You've been extremely generous with your time, and thanks for your book and very inspiring ideas, I think, for the whole industry. So it's been a huge pleasure, Neil. We wish you all the best for this end of the year, and we hope the next book is coming, maybe very soon.
Thank you. The pleasure is entirely mine. New book will be a while. New content early on next year. And what I always kind of tell people is it's your webinar to close, but I always like to mention this just as a last thought of mine. Nobody in this field is self-made. We're all benefit from the people that came before us, and we all try to pass this information on to everybody that follows. And so for anybody that's listening to this, if there's any questions that we didn't answer, please feel free to send them along. You certainly can connect with me online. Whether it's in a week or in a year from now, if there's anything I can do to help you build better customer relationships, feel free to reach out. I really love doing this stuff. It's great to connect with all of you.
Thank you, Indiana Jones of customer centricity, and have a wonderful day in Mountain View.
I love it. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.